And with the run reviews that we're doing, the way that it basically works, I'm saying this at each training meeting, if you get a run review question, so on the QA/QI part of our run reviews, Marcus and I are looking at pretty much all calls, but particularly paying attention to canceled calls anytime we administer medicine, anytime a concern is brought to us, so we have concerns from the ER, potentially concerns from other staff brought to us. We'll look at those calls. We'll look at them via image trend. I'll send you a message via image trend. It'll show up on your inbox. And so it's super, super helpful to me, / required, that if you get a message from me, so Mike Kremka, our medical director, if you don't know him, will almost always be CC'd on those. They'll be blind copied, not to hide it from you, which is like, it's either just automatically be CC'd or you'll see it there. I'll write something like, hey, what is this? Or, like, hey, it doesn't look like you took vitals. Sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes it's somewhere in there. Usually it's just that the documentation isn't as complete. That's the number one thing that we're seeing is the document, you may have done the thing that that you're claiming that you did, but if it's not written exactly that way, or if the fire department did something and it's not clearly delineated that way, then I'm hoping to just jump in there and point out some of those things, because it's easy for me to be behind the computer just looking at the run, right? I wasn't there on the screen, so that's the easy thing, but you have to realize that's what everybody else is going to see as well, right? So if you're having to, at the far end of this, if you're having to defend your actions in court, that's what it is. It's a document that looks like what I'm looking at. So what I need you to do is respond, no matter what, to just say, you can put in something like received. If there's no specific request, you can say got it, great. It's super helpful if you write like, got it, and here's what I was thinking, because that helps. It also just goes on our QA/QI record to close the loop of like, okay, you received that. You might also very reasonably ask, is there anything that we need to do? And there may be. Hopefully I'll have said that, like you've got to get in there and change this thing because it's flat out like going to screw you over. And that would be something that I would hopefully say in there. But otherwise you can just respond, like got it. I'm going to wait. I wait for those responses. Dr. Kremka waits for those responses because that acknowledges that you got the thing that we sent to you. These are generally, in fact, pretty much never meant to be punitive. They're meant to be educational. You are exceedingly welcome / encouraged to write back. I was just talking to somebody here. They had a question about, so I wrote, hey, this drug thing, this wasn't right. And then they wrote back and they said to me, hey, I thought that was right. Perfect question to write back on image trend. Put that question in the document that then goes back, because Dr. Kremka will then see that. I'm the training officer, right? I'm not your medical director. So then let's have Mike weigh in and say, great, this is actually a point that we need to highlight. So ask a question via image trend. You can certainly ask me on my own, but that's not really the point of this so much. The point of this is to have this dialogue that allows Dr. Kremka to understand what we're seeing and what you're doing, and allows me to have an official record of all that. So are there any questions about that? John, anything with documentation before we get started that you want to?
No, most people answer me with the thanks.
Yeah. Sometimes I get some rude responses. Okay. Okay. Jeff, any other admin stuff that we want to hit?
There has been a fair amount of missed narcotic usages that need to be documented in a lab tech. We're held by the DEA to be responsible for narcotics. So the old paper trail that we used to have, which was fill out paperwork usage and return, is the old style. The old new style is a lab tech which we're using. We just need to utilize that so that we're in compliance with how we track our narcotics. That's it. I know it's easy to forget, but it's really easy if you just do it from the hospital to the shop, and all you gotta do is replace your narcotics when you get back, pull it out of the machine and put it back in your rig and you're done. And so, but if you're having problems with that, or if you forget to do it, let me know, and Because I do look at those daily, and I get a weekly report, and I run a report, and as somebody they can contest to, I send them messages, because we have to comply with what state regulations tell us we have to do. So,
Also, as far as communication within the group, I've had some complaints, requests, like some folks aren't necessarily getting messages. Pretty much everything is going to be on a lat tech. That's our primary means. We've tried other things with email, which we try to send out. It doesn't seem like that's as effective. I tried to start a group text. I got shut down pretty violently. So I stopped that. But a lat tech, it literally wasn't what people wrote. But anyway, a lat tech is our way. So you got to check in on that and just check that front page in particular. It has the primary messages. If there's other ways that we can, communicate as a group, open to it. But that's just a source that we're just going to stick information about what's going on here. Okay. Kathy and I just come up with a training schedule for the entire for the next 7 months, which is going to go on. So you at least have the days laid out for you, which I know hasn't been done recently. So that'll be up there. All right. Anything else? Jeff, anything else? Okay. So we have a YouTube channel, it's an internal channel where our printings over the last year.
well, let me stop. 'Cause did you talk about the email that's coming out?
Nope.
Okay, so Bob wanted me to convey to you guys that the management staff put together, it's a pretty lengthy email that's going to explain about really kind of all the operations of where they were starting, where they're coming from. The number one thing you need to know is Medic 4 day 24, or the day shift will no longer be on call from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. during the week. And they're going to stay on their 24 on Fridays and Saturdays. Thursdays will become 24, so there'll be no more call time on Thursdays at all. They'll be in at 6 and they go home at 6 on Friday morning. Sundays, they will lose the nighttime from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So that Medic 4 crew, in theory, would go home on Sunday nights. But the 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. is no longer there, so you guys just come in, and that starts December 1st. Going forward from here to the end of the month, we just stay where we're at, what we've been always doing. We are working towards volume related, but we are working towards getting that extra 8 hours from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. off of that call schedule period of those other 4 days. That is something we're striving for, but we have to match the numbers in regards to, we have to be able to facilitate that.
Yeah, basically, we're looking at peak time staffing, and you look at the volume. Sunday nights after 10, 12 o'clock, there's not a lot to support the 24-hour shifts. So, that being said, if you're on Sunday and it's really busy, you keep the Medic 4 crew in until that time when they can be cut loose.
And no ping pong in Medic 4. If we send you home and then we bring them back, I don't care if it's 10:05, they walk out the door, and 10:10, you page them back in. It's over. They stay in. That's it. I mean, we don't want to play ping pong with Medic 4. We did that years ago with Medic 3, and it was a headache for people. Not only for us as the providers that were calling you back in, but for you guys that were calling back in. We don't want to do that to you. So if we call you in once, it's over.
So Medic 4 is in all the time now, except for Sunday through Wednesday nights. They go home at night at 10.
In theory, yeah. I mean, the 10 o'clock is what would be the goal if the volume allows for it. If the volume doesn't allow for it, then don't go home. I mean, the crew should we're going to give them an autonomy to say, keep them in. But we are going to look at it and ask them then why didn't you send Medic 4 home when you didn't run but one call after midnight? That doesn't make sense to the company. So, yeah. But we want you guys to be safe and cared for in that regards, and we don't want you guys to be overworked. So we're going to try to get that, which is what we want. So
Starting December 1st.
December 1st it starts, yeah. So tomorrow, right? That's how fast time goes.
Little off on the day.
December 1st. All right, I just mentioned the YouTube channel. That's where our trainings are recorded, and with David doing actual professional recording there, they're going to be a lot better than I've done in the past. So So we're gonna have Deborah talk to us now. Deborah is an employment consultant with the Missoula Job Service. She's gonna talk to us about sexual harassment. Again, this will all be available for folks afterwards. Thank you very much for coming in and educating us.
Thank you. So as Dave said, my name is Deborah Gass. I'm a workforce consultant at the Missoula Job Service. One of the things that I do is I specialize in employment law, and I go out and I do a lot of presentations in the community to a lot of employers. And it's really exciting that your company has invited me in to come and provide you with information and resources about discrimination, harassment, and sexual harassment. As far as I know, there haven't been any specific complaints or anything like that. It's just a smart thing for employers to do, to provide you with information so that if you feel like you're in a situation where you're being harassed or treated unfairly, you'll know what your options are and what you can do about it. So my first question a lot of times is, how many people have actually read the handbook and know what your sexual harassment policy is? So a couple of hands back here. I'm not expecting you to say it verbatim, but what do you remember about it?
I remember reading it, I don't
Okay.
to be honest.
Do you remember anything about it at all? So that would be the first thing I'd really encourage everyone to do. I know that for myself, when I first started out in the world of work and I was, doing all these kinds of things, and employment law wasn't my focus, you go into work and you get that company handbook and you're filling out all your benefit information. It's not the first thing you do is go home and open up the policy manual and take a look and see what everything is. What ends up happening is you'll get in trouble and you'll go to the manual and see, well, what am I supposed to do when this happens? So it's kind of nice to be proactive, especially with things like this. And so I took a look at your policy manual, and you've got your standard operating, and I'm going to say procedures, but that's the wrong word here. It's G, guidance. Standard operating guidance, and then you also have your company policies. The main thing that's really important about the harassment policy is knowing who you need to report to if you feel like you're being treated unfairly in the workplace. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual mistreatment. It could be that you're being treated unfairly because you belong to a protected class. So knowing that bit of information can be really helpful. So I did print it out. And it's really nice you guys have an equal employment opportunity area. The prohibition against discrimination, retaliation, and harassment. So it's illegal to discriminate against others on the basis of sex, age, race, creed, color, national origin, religion, marital status, or disability. It's also illegal to retaliate against others for reporting or opposing discrimination or participating in an investigation or discriminatory proceedings. Discrimination and retaliation will not be tolerated, and any employee who engages in discriminatory or retaliatory conduct or harassment will be disciplined and possibly terminated. So as I go through my presentation, I'm going to be referring to a lot of these sorts of concepts. We'll go through a brochure that's been put together by the Human Rights Bureau, which is Montana's regulatory agency that investigates discrimination. And we'll talk about each of these concepts in a little bit more depth. And as I go through the information, if you have questions, ask them as they occur to you, because I found that if I wait till the end, you'll forget what your question was, and a lot of times it's really pertinent to the material that we're discussing at this time, and can lead to more discussion. And at some points in time, I might call on you, because I think these types of trainings work better if you all work together and discuss what's going on and voice issues and concerns, because we learn a lot more from each other. And you guys are actually in this organization working together and understand a lot more about how processes work and how things might be working or not working in your organization. So the next paragraph in your policy states that sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination. Examples of this harassment include, but are not limited to, unwanted sexual advances, demands for sexual favors, repeated sexual jokes, flirtation, advances, propositions, verbal abuse, graphic verbal commentary about an individual's body, sexual prowess or deficiencies, unwelcome touching, assault, coerced sexual acts, or suggestive, insulting, obscene comments or gestures, and display in the workplace of sexually subjective objects or pictures. Your company won't tolerate discrimination or harassment, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Your cooperation in preventing this kind of conduct is essential. So one of the interesting words I find right here is the word intentional. And this is something where our society is changing so quickly. We're coming to a point where it's really obvious right now, your intention doesn't matter. If you say something or do something, what matters is how the recipient perceives that action. So even though your intent might be totally innocent, it can backfire or have a negative impact on someone else. So we all need to keep that in mind as we say things and as we do things in the workplace. Okay, so an employee who believes that he or she has been or is being subject to any form of discrimination, retaliation, or harassment should immediately inform his or her supervisor, or alternatively the manager, following the grievance and appeal procedure in Section A13. An employee who observes harassment of a fellow employee likewise should report the conduct to the supervisor or to the manager. So when you hear that part of the policy, what does that mean to you? I can stand up here all day.
I think it means you have a responsibility to watch out for each other and help each other out.
What it means is, you can't just point and say, that's the supervisor's job. That's the manager's job to notice. Of course, they're involved. They should be taking care of those things. But each one of you, as an individual, should be looking out for each other. And if you see something happening, and you think that it might be on that edge of not good behavior, not behavior that should be tolerated, we need to be aware of that and stick up for our fellow employees and help protect them when things like this are going on. The company will make every effort to keep the identity of the complainant confidential, but they can't guarantee confidentiality if it does go to an investigation. Management will investigate all harassment complaints, and Missoula Emergency Service forbids retaliation against employees who report harassment or discrimination. Let's see. They can take disciplinary action against employees who've engaged in these kinds of conduct and possibly terminate the employee. They can also take disciplinary action against employees who condone or fail to report incidents of harassment or who retaliate against those who reported such incidences. And then this is really essential too. Making false reports of harassment under this policy is also grounds for disciplinary action, including termination. Pull this out, read it. It's great information. It helps protect you as an individual. It helps protect the company against potential complaints. And it's just good information for everybody to have. So what's been going on in the news lately? Has anybody read anything about sexual harassment or heard an interesting story about it? A few things? Does anybody have something that caught their eye? Is there any? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Was it like a governor, the mayor, somebody in office? Okay. 30 years later? I don't know. I don't follow the news very closely.
You know that guy.
Some dude.
He's a politician. She's married.
I'm a registered voter, people.
I'll be back. No? Yeah, I've got a few more. Nobody's heard of anything interesting that they remember that they'd like to share? Well, there's been a lot of stuff, especially in the entertainment industry, and I think that that's really brought this to light. A lot of people are starting to talk about it. This Me Too movement, where a lot of people very high in the upper echelons of the entertainment industry, people making $1 million salaries, have lost their jobs because of their behavior in the workplace, and because they were treating people in inappropriate manners. So I think that what we're seeing now is our society is starting to become very much aware of this sort of behavior, and it's not being tolerated as much as it used to in the past. So we need to be aware of that as well. As society changes, our behavior needs to change, and so something that might have been okay 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, we're finding that it's just not acceptable anymore, and we need to be aware of it. One of the interesting things that I was reading recently, my daughter happens to be a dance major at a university back east, and so I'm very interested in ballet. And recently, American Ballet Theater, one of the premier ballet companies, had to fire two of its principal ballet dancers, male dancers, who were involved in taking pictures of the female dancers. Now, some of these things were, one couple was involved in a relationship that went south, but while they were in the relationship, he was secretly taking photos of her, and when the relationship ended badly, decided to share some of those pictures with his friends along with negative comments. And with the internet and with our little phones here, it's really easy for lots and lots of people to get access to that information. And it just hit on a really broad level. I think two people were terminated immediately. One, they're still investigating their role because he said he received the pictures, but he didn't want them. So there are two things that are going on. Taking pictures of someone without their knowledge and then disseminating those pictures. Totally inappropriate. Things like that should never happen in the workplace. If you do those sorts of things, termination is probably going to happen for sure. And nowadays, you have to be really careful about what you put on your phone because those records can be saved forever. They can do forensic filings and figure out how to find that stuff. So just be very careful. It's not an appropriate thing to do. If you're in a relationship, make sure that it's a consensual thing that's happening, but be aware that if you're also working together, it adds an additional level of complexity to that situation. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and one of those newer ways that we're seeing things change in the workplace. Be careful what you put on your phone. Text messages are becoming one of those things that they're using a lot for documentation in any kind of discrimination lawsuit. So treat people with respect and dignity and reread things before you send them out and make sure that they're not open to interpretation.
Deborah, I have a question.
Yes.
Is sexual orientation a protected class?
Okay, so sexual orientation in the city of Missoula is a protected class. It's not listed in this brochure because it's not a protected class for the state of Montana. However, what we're seeing is a definite trend towards that being protected, and it may not be a law yet, but I think that you'll find that if it did go to a jury case, people would feel that it was and react accordingly. So in Missoula, yes. In the state of Montana, it's not totally protected yet. Be smart though. Treat everybody with respect and dignity, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender. There's even that concept of somebody is male or female, but they're not presenting themselves as typically female. You really shouldn't discriminate against people for anything like that. Okay, so in the state of Montana, we have lots of different protected classes, and these are the things that you need to be aware of when you're in the workplace to make sure that your behavior, your actions, and your words do not do anything that could harm or disrespect a person within these protected classes. One of the interesting things to me is that a lot of times I'll get phone calls from people and they'll be upset. They say, oh, I've been discriminated against. But they don't fall into one of these protected classes. And so in order for discrimination to be illegal, the first part of that three-step tier is the individual needs to belong to a protected class. They need to have some kind of adverse employment action happen. And then they also need to provide or prove a causal link between the two. So it needs to be something like, I'm black, I wasn't hired. And I was not hired because I'm black, that kind of thing. I'm a female, I didn't get the promotion, that's why, that's why you didn't get the promotion, is simply because you were female. Keeping that in mind. So, in Montana, we protect age. And we protect age at all levels. So, if somebody were 14 years old and able to do a certain type of work, if someone chose not to hire them because they were only 14, that would be age discrimination. At the federal level, age discrimination starts at the age of 40, but in Montana, we recognize all levels. But what makes this even more complex is that you have to take a look at a lot of different laws when we're looking at things like this. We've got Montana state laws, we have federal laws, you might have a collective bargaining agreement, you have your policy manual. All of these things are different rules that need to be followed. So typically if it went to court, what would happen is they would look at the law that provides the highest level of protection to the employee. So in age, Montana says any age, so that is what the law would look at. However, if there's something along the lines of you need to be at least 18 to drive a tractor trailer, and at least 21 to drive that tractor trailer over state lines, that's okay to do, because that in itself is also adding an additional level of protection to the employee, because we've decided that they're too young to be able to do it successfully, to drive that truck across state lines. So child labor standards come into play, that adds an additional level of protection. Things like alcohol and tobacco use and ages with that, those are okay to discriminate against someone in that manner as well. So religion is protected in that it needs to be a widely known and a religion that people are aware of. So somebody can't just make up a religion and get additional treatment at work because they've made up their own religion. It has to be something that's accepted. Creed we've added in Montana, that's an extra one. Creed we mostly find in things like some of the Native American religions. So it needs to be a process that is reverential and widely done within that group, and then that counts as creed. You also cannot discriminate against people because of physical or mental disabilities. If they have a physical or mental disability, we need to have a discussion about reasonable accommodations. In the state of Montana, marital status is protected. And typically what we find is that, especially in the ranching industry, you might find that couples are hired to work on a ranch, and maybe the husband is the outfitter and the wife does bookkeeping or something like that. There was a case at one of the ranches here in Montana where the husband had a disagreement with the owner of the ranch, and the owner fired him. But as part of his compensation package, he and his wife were allowed to live in a cabin on the ranch while they were performing their duties. And so when the husband was fired, the owner kicked them both out of the house and said, "You guys have to get off my property right away." Well, the wife hadn't done anything wrong. She was performing her job to the standards that were necessary, and yet she lost compensation because of who she was married to. And so when that went to court, they decided that was discrimination as well. Race, color, national origin, sex, which includes maternity, pregnancy, and sexual harassment. And then in the state of Montana, we also protect political belief only at the state and local government levels. So you have this little brochure, and I'll refer to it every once in a while as we're going through all of these, as we go through the material. I'm going to show a really quick video that kind of talks about additional forms of harassment. Now these videos are a little dry. They were prepared by attorneys who are not fabulous actors. So take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But after we watch it, I am going to ask some questions, and hopefully people will participate. Before I start the video, does anybody have a question about any of these protected classes? Okay.